Hello, my name's Tim, welcome to Tim Burbage Reads, and today I'm going to be doing something for the first time ever, which is a double book review, 2 book reviews in one. And that's because these are linked in a couple of ways. One is that I read them both at the same time, I was kind of going between the two, and the second is they're about the same topic, and that is planes and aviation. So I work in that industry, so it's interesting to see my view on these books, both in terms from an enjoyment perspective, you know, plot, characters, conflict, tension, prose, things like that, and also from a kind of industry perspective on how realistic they are and how realistic they are trying to be. Just because a book is more realistic doesn't necessarily make it more enjoyable. We like that. Escaping from reality for the sake of a good story. So the first book is Airframe by Michael Crichton, which is a tech thriller about the investigation of an aircraft incident. A flight on a fictional airline was on a fictional aircraft developed by a fictional aircraft company, and something went wrong on the flight. 3 people died, a load of people were injured, and we follow the quality assurance manager, vice president of the aircraft manufacturer doing this investigation. The other is I read on my Kindle, and that is Missing in Flight by Audrey J Cole. This is it's a thriller. I would say it's in the domestic thriller category, which is interesting because it's set on a domestic flight where a mother loses her 6-month-old baby on board. True closed room mystery. They're at 30,000 feet. Where's the baby? And we then follow the investigation. We follow FBI. We have her partner who is on the ground and stuff's going on with him, and they're all trying to figure stuff out. So both are kind of thrillers, but take it in a completely different direction. This was published in 1996, while Missing in Flight is coming out 1st of March, I think. So I saw on the Kindle, and they were like, we're giving this away for free. So I clicked on it and I read it, and it was good. So I've never really done a dual thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about Airframe first, and then I'm going to talk about Missing in Flight, and then at the end, I'm going to talk about how realistic it was. So, Airframe. I really like this book. This book was really interesting because it is a mystery in itself, in the fact that we follow the main character who is trying to... the main character is called Casey, and she is trying to figure out what happened. That's, instead of who did the murder, it's why did the plane do what it did? Is it a technical issue with the design from the aircraft? Is it pilot error? Is it a combination of factors, as all these things usually are? But you also have, one thing I really enjoyed about this was how every person is looking at this problem with their own slightly different angle. So Casey works for the aircraft company, so they need to investigate it, but also make sure it's not the aircraft's fault. The engineers are watching everything happening, and they're saying it can't be the aircraft's fault because they're so invested in it. We have the airline's view, which is, well, it can't be the airline's fault. You need to figure out what the cause is, but it can't be the airline's fault. You have lawyers involved. You then have the media come in about halfway through, and the media are looking for a good story. That's what they're looking for. You have parts manufacturers get involved. You have the FAA get involved. And everybody is coming at this with a slightly different angle. And I really enjoyed that. You have the commercials of the company. There's like a big plane deal going through, and this issue could derail that. You have the unions get involved. You have and the concerns over what the company is doing. You have a bit of corporate skullduggery, which is really interesting. So you have all of this noise going on while Casey is trying to figure out what happened. And that's what I really enjoyed about this, was that you find out right at the very, very end what happened. Casey finds out a little bit before you, and you spend, I don't know, the last 10% maybe, last 20%, following her as she tries to prove what she thinks happened. She can't just say what happened, she needs to prove it. And you see all the clues, and there's red herrings all over the place. Telemetry tells you one thing and the electrics tell you something else. There's a problem with the telemetry data, and it's going to take too long to decouple and redo. It's going to take weeks, and they don't have weeks because the deal's coming through. And now the news are involved, and what do they want? I found it really interesting. This has a huge cast of characters, which I thought was very good, because lots of people would get involved in this, and it's not as if one person has all of the technical knowledge. So you have like a radio guy, you have a visuals guy, you have a data guy, you have an engineer, you have the lead engineer, you have the engineer who's in charge of the hydraulics, you have blah, 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 blah. All of these different people. I thought the tension was mainly driven by the mystery, and the mystery had a ticking clock to it because of this commercial deal. There were two parts which were like physical threat, like, oh, what's going to happen? Is someone going to attack her? Things like that. They felt a little bit forced, maybe because it's a techno thriller. You can't just have the investigation itself be 100% of the focus. You need, he probably got a note from his editor being like, yeah, jazz it up a bit, The last book had dinosaurs, put something like that in, and that was still, Michael Crichton has the ability to make threat, make tension in his prose, in his writing, and there was still that level of threat, but it felt a bit disingenuous compared to the rest of the book. It felt a bit, as I said before, unrealistic for the sake of a good story. I'll come to the realism later, but I really, really enjoyed this book. This was a 5-star read for me. Next, I'm going to go on to Missing in Flight, which I'm going to put there. This is a different kind of thriller. So we have a woman who, she has her baby in the bassinet. She goes to the bathroom, her baby's sleeping, she comes back and the baby's gone. This was again another mystery. We're trying to figure out where the baby is. There is inherent tension in that. As a parent, that's incredibly stressful. When you're out with your kids at the park and they disappear for like 2 seconds, those are incredibly long 2 seconds as you're trying to find them. And then you see they were just hiding behind a tree, and then you have your small heart attack has finished. Imagine that for a tiny baby on a plane. I get that. We then have lots of, there's a bit of corporate skullduggery here because her husband is like a big banker, or like a wealth management fund, that kind of thing. We also have a key thing that's raised very early, which I think fits into the domestic thriller genre, is introducing the idea that our main character might not be a reliable narrator. There's stuff about a mental illness that could possibly be hereditary, things like this, and that's what drives a lot of the tension as a reader, is you're like, was even the baby on board? Is she having an episode? Things like that. The cast here is a heck of a lot smaller. There's meant to be like 50 passengers on board. I think 3 of them get names. The cabin crew get names. The pilots get names. One of the pilots is a point of view. There's all of the points of view have views and opinion on children and how they view the situation. Maybe they don't have children. Maybe they really, really want children. Maybe they have children who have grown up. Things like that. That kind of comes up quite a lot. I think, apart from the husband, I think all of the other point of view characters are women. This feels like Gone Girl in the air. That kind of domestic thriller of, maybe this isn't all true, or maybe he's the bad guy, or maybe she's the bad guy, and things like that. And you're trying to figure out what happened. I found that the tension, it couldn't hold me for that length of the book. They kind of searched everyone, and they searched every bag, and they said the baby's not here. And the main character, Michaela, was like, well, you need to search here, you need to try here. And she starts getting up and saying, you need to go here, you need to go here, and starts demanding stuff from the crew. And that happened, and I was like, okay, cool, we're getting to a point where, like, we need something to change this situation, you know? I always think when you see, like, bottle episodes and things like that, they work really well because it's in closed space, but quite often you need some revelation or something to change the situation. And that didn't really happen. The baby goes missing in the first chapter, and then you spend 200 pages trying to figure out what happened to the baby, and then you figure that out, and then it kind of moves on. And you spend a lot of that time, the later in the book, with the other characters, the FBI agents, the pilots, the husband, things like that. But the main character runs out of stuff to do. We start retreading ground quite quickly, and it can't, nothing changes the situation in the air ultimately until very late in the book, and you kind of reach the climax, and that there's a lack of situation changing. You know, her 5 pages in is basically the same as she is 200 pages in, kind of. So that, I gave it 3 stars, I think. I think if you like reading thrillers, I don't read a lot of thrillers. If you like reading thrillers, domestic thrillers especially, I think this would really fit. You have lots of women characters and female points of view in a very male-dominated industry. That's what Airframe also has. And yeah, so for me, that was 3 stars. It was kind of 3.5, but I've just brought it down to 3 on Goodreads. Now I'm going to talk about the realism here. Airframe is incredibly realistic. As someone who works in the aviation industry, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a pilot, so there are probably things here that are incorrect, but you know, the main character gets telexes. We send telexes, because we still send telexes now, really. You know, they talk about mods to the aircraft, which is, there's an issue that's found, you do the mod, that makes the aircraft more safe. Or why isn't this airline done the mod? Well, that's because they're a foreign carrier and they're not under the jurisdiction of the FAA. They talk about how close FAA and the aircraft manufacturers are, and is that a problem? Well, you can't store them centrally, you can't store the design centrally because it's IP, and you don't, you know, like, let alone the engineering detail that goes into this, which there is a lot of, you know, like technical information, bulletins and things like that. You know, the final aircraft incident report is written in that style. Not only the engineering details are exact, but also the kind of how the aviation industry works. This talks a lot about deregulation, which happened in the 90s, which allowed aircraft companies to kind of boom. They talked about the DC-10, they talk about Boeing, they talk about Airbus, they talk about the tribality of Europe versus America from an aircraft manufacturing perspective. They talk about the politics of, if you send a load of planes to a particular country, it's the gentleman's agreement that you then send part of the plane to be manufactured in that country. So they have like an emotional and political and economical tie to that aircraft. But you don't want to send the wings because that is the bit that kind of changes how your aircraft functions. That's like the top priority. So super, super realistic, I thought. For missing in flight, there were several fundamental issues with the realism of the book. And the book, I don't think, ever intends to be super realistic. Airframe is going for that. Airframe is, you know, Michael Crichton has put in the research, and the way that he writes anything is it's always very technical and very well researched, or it comes across that way. So he can't be woolly with the details, because that's what you're getting when you get a Michael Crichton book. Missing in Flight, it's a domestic thriller. You know, it's about the main concept of someone, this baby is gone on this plane. How could that have happened? There are so many things that the crew don't do, which are bizarre. The crew don't ever check the manifest. That would be the very first thing that you do. The manifest is the list of every single person who was on that plane, guaranteed. They're like, oh, the unreliable narrator, was the baby even on board? They would know if the baby was on board. There would never be a question of that. The main character, Michaela, does lots of things that put the safety of the people and the plane in danger, and she does get restrained eventually, but it takes a very long time. Like, if she's doing what she would be doing, she would be restrained very, very quickly. There's stuff going on that's in towards the climax, which is hilariously unrealistic. Just like it turns into, you know, an Expendables movie at a point, which is frankly hilarious. And but I'm okay with that being the climax because it's a thriller and that's what it's meant to be. But there's just so many things that happen that just would not happen on a plane. Just would not happen on a plane. And the end result being that you end up, it just undercut any of the tension. For me, it kind of took me out of the story a little bit because the problem, the problem appeared on page 5 due to the baby disappeared in the first chapter. And they could have solved the problem by like page 6. You know what I mean? And the story wouldn't have happened. So those are my thoughts as a professional in the industry. I think Airframe was far more realistic than Missing in Flight. But those are just my opinions. So let me know in the comments below about any fiction or non-fiction, but mainly fiction that you have read that has been set in something that you know really well, be it a city that you know really well, or an industry that you know really well, or about a particular subject that you're like a big buff about and you know lots about. And were they accurate? Were they hilariously inaccurate? Were they accurate enough to kind of win you over? Please give this video a like, I really appreciate it. Please subscribe if you want to see more. I'm getting close to 200 subscribers, which is really exciting for me personally. That's a big number. And I'll see you in the next one. Now, get out of my house!